Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. And in today's video, I'll be essentially ranking each party's top 10 potential 2024 candidates. There are lots of people that I could have thrown in here that I didn't like. For example, Sherrod Brown I could have thrown in. But I just don't think that he's gonna run. I mean, like there's a good chance that he does, but I just didn't throw him in here. And there are people that I didn't throw in that could have run and could have been high up on this list. But yeah, so as you can probably see by now, I am doing a sort of EP official style video for this just because A, I like it better, and B, I feel like it would actually work better like this. Let me know if you guys want me to do videos like this whenever I'm doing a video where it's not an electoral map thing where I'm just discussing things, where I'm discussing whether or not someone's a good candidate, or whether or not someone will, or whether or not a scandal will affect somebody, or something like that. If anything like that happened, or if any other major events happen, how they could and their electoral implications. If you guys want me to do something like that, I would. If you guys want me to continue to do like these types of videos, I will try to do them. But as you can see, this is essentially the general layout: the candidate name, the number that they are in the ranking, and then their party, and then their photo on the left. So let's get started with the number 10 Democrat, and that is Joe Kennedy III. Now, I could have thrown Tulsi Gabbard in. I feel like it may have been a good idea. I was considering doing an honorable mentions, but I couldn't really think of many people that I would actually want to throw in there that would really work. And Tulsi Gabbard was essentially the only one, so this is essentially just her honorable mention. But for Joe Kennedy III, he's a progressive. He was a former representative from Massachusetts, ran for Senate and lost. He didn't primary at Markey. It's not that he lost like the race itself. He lost the primary. Um, but he's fairly progressive. He is obviously a Kennedy, and so that could, I guess, be seen as him being part of the establishment. But he is in a way a populist. He conveys a populist message, while not necessarily being very populist. But I do think that he would be not a phenomenal candidate with the white working class, but he would be pretty strong. But I also think that he would be strong with suburban voters. I think he's a very good suburban candidate. And he is exciting enough to be able to raise turnout pretty high. So that is Joe Kennedy at number 10. For the Republicans, number 10, I have Ted Cruz. Now, Cruz is a pretty bad minority candidate. He's also a pretty bad candidate for the suburbs, and he's also not a great candidate for the white working class. He's decent there, though, and he's Trumpist, which would help him. He doesn't have a whole lot going for him. He's very unpopular, but he is a Trumpist, so he'll probably be able to do decent enough with the white working class. So I threw him in here at number 10. For the Democrats, number 10, California Governor Gavin Newsom. He's pretty unpopular with the Republicans for his shutdowns and lockdowns, I guess, in the state of California for COVID. So he's not necessarily incredibly popular with Republicans, and he could be seen as an establishmentarian figure to people in the Rust Belt, which is obviously something you don't want. There's a good chance that he'd lose Wisconsin, maybe Pennsylvania. But he's a fairly strong candidate. I mean, like, he's not anything amazing, but he is the governor of California, and he hasn't really had many major scandals. Like I said, his main critique from people is his handling of the COVID pandemic. He's had multiple recalls. I think this will be like his sixth or seventh. I may be wrong on that. I saw it in another video. Hoping that's right. But he's been successful in the past, and I think that he will. Obviously not be an amazing candidate, but he's not a candidate that the Democrats would want to nominate, but he's a strong enough candidate. Now for the Republicans, number 9, I have Tim Scott. Scott is an interesting type of politician because he has appeal to moderate Republicans and younger Republicans while still while not like publicly denouncing Trump. He seems to obviously like Trump, and he spoke at like the RNC, so he is obviously a Trump Republican, but he has a lot of appeal to younger, I guess neocons kind of, which is something that he does have going for him. I don't think he'd do very well in the Rust Belt. I think that he's a decent suburban candidate, and he may be a strong candidate with minorities. I mean, like, he is, I think, the only black Republican in the Senate, which would obviously be an upside for him with minorities. but he is probably a little bit too Trumpist and probably won't do. I mean, he's not Trumpist, but he's probably a little bit too Trumpist to do amazing in the suburbs. I think he would still be a pretty strong candidate in the suburbs. No Mitt Romney or anything though, but he would also be a fairly decent candidate, I think, in like or sorry, not a very good candidate in the Rust Belt. I mean, like he's just not the Trumpist exciting candidate that you would want, but he's strong enough to probably I don't necessarily want to say get the job done because he probably like he's not amazing, but he's strong enough to put up a decent fight. For the Democrats, number 8, I have Vice President Kamala Harris. She is a pretty strong suburban candidate. I'll give her that. And she would probably be a decent candidate with minorities. She's had a lot of criticism for things that she's done in the past. Biden was able to get away from it and do well with minorities. I think that she likely would as well. Also, I think that she could sort of make a name for herself in the Biden administration as like a civil rights champion, sort of. But she, among white working class voters, is an absolutely abysmal candidate. She is horrible with them. She has hardly any appeal. But she could do very well with them if the Biden administration is a successful administration and if it's popular among the white working class. So she'll have her struggles, but she could be a fairly strong candidate. For the Republicans, I have South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem. Now, she definitely has Trumpist appeal, and she probably has some more moderate, or I guess traditionalist appeal. However, she will definitely suffer from her handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. She did not handle it amazingly. South Dakota was one of the worst states in the U.S., at least per capita. So she is not going to be doing amazing from that. However, she is Trumpist, and that probably won't be enough to get her through, but she will, it'll probably be enough to give her a somewhat legitimate chance at actually doing something. Next up is Amy Klobuchar. Klobuchar, I mean, like, she's very moderate. She's from Minnesota. I think that she would do very well in the Rust Belt. I mean, she won Minnesota by a pretty large margin in her Senate race. I think it was like a safe margin. So she is a strong Rust Belt candidate. She's a moderate. She's decent, I would say, among suburban voters and probably average among minority voters. So she has a lot going for her. She's not really lacking in many areas, or any areas for that matter, really. But she is definitely strong among the white working class, and I think that's a very, very good sign for her. Next up is Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Now, Abbott, he won by a very large margin of victory. He won by, I think, like 13% in Texas in 2018. He was the incumbent, though. I don't think on the presidential level he'd actually win it by that much. However, he was an incumbent in, I guess, Texas, like, his incumbency. I don't think he'd do as well on the presidential level, once again. But he is a decent suburban candidate for a Republican. He has Trumpist appeal while also having traditionalist appeal. I think that he'd probably do decent in the Rust Belt, probably carry Wisconsin, maybe Pennsylvania. But he would have a lot of traditional appeal and suburban appeal, maybe enough to carry Arizona and Georgia. It's not certain, but he definitely has more suburban appeal than the average Republican, though he doesn't necessarily have bags of it. Next up is Stacey Abrams. I mean, like, she's a pretty strong candidate with suburban voters. I don't want to say that she's, like, insane. She's also not, like, awful. I would say that she's slightly above average. Among minority voters, she is very, very strong. She has done a lot to raise minority turnout. That's why I think one of her strongest points is she would raise turnout very, very high. Among the white working class, I don't think that she'd do amazing. I don't think that she'd do absolutely horrendously, but she wouldn't do very well, or she wouldn't do, like, amazing. She'd probably be able to do decent in Michigan and maybe Pennsylvania, but I think that her strong suit would come in states like, in some Belt states. She could maybe carry North Carolina, probably will carry Georgia, Arizona, and can put up, like, a fight in Texas. So she is definitely, she could also make states, like, right now she apparently is trying to flip Mississippi, so she can make Mississippi legitimately competitive. But that is more or less where her strong suit is. Not an amazing Rust Belt candidate, not absolutely horrendous, though. Well, once again, very strong with minorities and raising minority turnout. Next up is former Vice President Mike Pence. Now, Pence, he doesn't have a whole lot of appeal. He has some suburban appeal, probably more than Trump, as he is more of like a traditional Republican. However, he was still Trumpist and the defender of Trump, which was not a great sign if you're going to run in the suburbs. He is probably going to do not amazing in the suburbs, but slightly better than Trump, or at least slightly better than Trump would in 2024. The suburbs will continue to shift, but he would do better than Trump in the He would do better than Trump would in the suburbs, if they were on the same ticket. So I think that is something he has going for him, but it's also not great because he's once again still not a great suburban candidate. Among like Trumpist Republicans, he would probably be fairly weak. He'll win most of them, but he probably won't be able to turn out many of them, and he'd also be probably pretty weak in the Rust Belt because he's not very exciting. But he would have name recognition going for him. A lot of these candidates that I've listed so far, for the Republicans don't have a lot of name recognition. Tim Scott, not a lot of name recognition. Ted Cruz, not a whole lot of name recognition. Kristi Noem, Greg Abbott, not a whole lot of name recognition. I'd probably say the one with the most is Ted Cruz. But once we've already reviewed him, he's not a very good candidate. So among candidates that would actually do decent, he probably so far has the most name recognition, which would probably not carry him a whole lot of the way, but it would probably be enough for, or a little bit enough for him to get him in the number 6 spot. Also, once again, considering the fact that he would probably be slightly better than Trump and probably do better among traditionals and moderates. Now, for the Democrats, number 5, I put Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. Beshear, I mean, like, he's popular, or he was popular with his voters. Last time I checked, I looked up a poll from like February of 2021. He had like a 55% approval rating, which is pretty high, and he's strong. I mean, like he was able to win in Kentucky in in a year that wasn't necessarily a blue wave year. It was 2019. So he definitely is a fairly strong candidate as a Democrat for white rural voters. I think he will be pretty good in the Rust Belt. And he'd probably be a decent suburban candidate. Among minorities, I mean, like, Kentucky doesn't really have, like, a high minority population, but he seems like he would be a fairly strong candidate for minorities. Over here, number 5 is Nikki Haley. She is anti-Trumpist in a way. She's probably more anti-Trump than she is Trumpist, but she's not a full, Mitt Romney, Ben Sass, anti-Trump, type person. She doesn't have a whole lot of suburban appeal, however. I reviewed this in a previous video. In 2014, she won the suburbs by a smaller margin than Trump did 2 years later. So in 2016, Trump won the suburbs by a larger margin than she did in 2014, which, mind you, was a red wave. She also only overperformed him by 5% in 2020 when he did horrendously in the suburbs. So after 6 years of shifting, so in a red wave election year, she overperformed Trump by 5% after he was one of the most hated suburban candidates in the U.S. after 6 years of them being able to shift, which is not a good thing. Similar thing with minorities. She performs similarly to Trump, so she's a decent candidate with minorities. Among Trumpist candidates, Trumpist voters, not Trumpist candidates. Among Trumpist voters, she'd probably do decent, but she's not insanely popular. And then the Rust Belt, she would do horrendously. She is similar to Kamala Harris, too establishmentarian to do very well among the white working class. Next up is Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Whitmer, she was able to win in Michigan by roughly 10%, I think it was, which is obviously a pretty large margin of victory in the state of Michigan. This was a blue wave, but I think it really does show that she has appeal all across the board. She would be a pretty strong candidate for the white working class. I think that she would be a strong candidate in the South with minorities, or I guess in the Sun Belt. I think that she would also probably be a decent candidate in the suburbs. So she has a lot going for her, so I think that she would probably be the 4th best Democratic candidate that they could run. For the Republicans, number 4, Marco Rubio. Rubio has more moderate appeal and traditional appeal than a lot of Republicans, but he was very Trumpist, which is why, sorry about that, I don't think he would do very well. He would probably do pretty bad in the Rust Belt. I don't think that he has what it takes to do very well up there. I do think that he would be pretty strong in with minority voters. He probably would do pretty decent. In the suburbs, he'd probably do better than Trump would, but he still wouldn't be doing amazing because he was Trumpist. Although I do think he would probably do decent to a point where it's not like absolutely abysmal. For the Democrats, number 3, I have Beto O'Rourke. O'Rourke is a very good campaigner. He's very, very similar to Barack Obama um, in his campaign tactics, but he also is he's a strong candidate. I mean, like he did very well in Texas in 2018. I mean, like yeah, it was a blue wave, but I mean, like if you factor out the blue wave, he still did really well there. I mean, like even when we go look at Biden's performance, he's a very good candidate. He's good with rural white voters. He has some sort of appeal with those voters, which I don't fully understand it. But he has almost like Obama like appeal. He also has a lot of appeal to I think he has obviously pretty strong minority appeal, but he's exciting enough to raise a lot of turnout. I think he'd be pretty good in the Rust Belt. He's pretty exciting. Um, a fairly strong candidate. He's pretty good with white rural voters. Which I mean, like he's probably not going to be like the best candidate for the Rust Belt, but he's not going to be like a Sherrod Brown, but he's not Kamala Harris. And then he'd also I think he could do very well in states like Iowa, because he has a lot of appeal to white rural voters. Which is why I ranked Beto O'Rourke at number three. For the Republicans, number three, I have Missouri Senator Josh Hawley. Hawley is Trumpist, but he's similar to Tim Scott in the fact that he walks this weird, strange fine line. Almost like he has appeal to younger Republicans, yet also appeal to Trumpist Republicans. So I think that's a very good sign for him. He is not a great suburban candidate. I think he would be a pretty bad suburban candidate. He would have Trump as appeal, and he'd probably be strong enough though to do well in the Rust Belt. I think he would be a pretty strong Rust Belt candidate. I don't think he'd be strong enough to win like Michigan, for example, but I do think he is a strong, pretty decently strong Rust Belt candidate. He brands himself as a populist, which is a pretty strong message, I guess. He was able to flip a seat in Missouri by a pretty large margin of victory in a blue wave year, which is obviously something. Among minorities, I don't think he do very well. And once again, I don't think he do amazing in the Rust Belt. Or sorry, in the suburbs. Also, probably not amazing in the Rust Belt. He wouldn't do as bad as he would in the suburbs. I think he'd be an awful suburban candidate, but he'd be pretty good in the Rust Belt. And I think that he would probably be able to do well with rural white voters. Now, for the Democrats, number two, I have Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. Now, Buttigieg he has a lot of white working class appeal. He's one of the best candidates that the Democrats have up in the Rust Belt, but I also think he's a really strong candidate for like the suburbs. He's like a he's weird because he's a moderate, yet he's also progressive in a weird way. Like for example, he doesn't take the moderate or I guess the conservative like no free healthcare stance. He also doesn't take the Medicare for all stances. He said Medicare for all who want it. That's kind of how Buttigieg is. He takes progressive ideas, he takes moderate ideas, and he sort of pushes them together. So he can appear progressive in the eyes of some and moderate in the eyes of others, which is a very good sign for him. Or it could entirely backfire, and he could be viewed as from progressives as moderates, and viewed by moderates as a progressive. But I think that that's not really happened yet. That's not really what we've seen. Although that could happen, it would be really bad. But I don't think it's gonna happen. He's a really good candidate in the Rust Belt. He is strong with the rural white working class voters. He's a pretty good suburban candidate as well. I mean, like he's the type of candidate that would do very well in the suburbs. And then with minority voters, that's one of his bigger problems. He's not amazing with minority voters. I do think that turnout would probably or could be lowered, but he would probably make up for it. Considering the fact that he just do very well in the suburbs among white rural voters. Once again, turnout would probably be lowered slightly among minority voters, but I do think that he would do well with minorities that do turn out. Just because he didn't do very well with minorities in the primaries doesn't mean he won't necessarily do very well with minorities in the actual election. Joe Biden did phenomenally with minority voters and took large portions of the vote. So that may be one reason. So I do think that Buttigieg I don't necessarily think that'll be a major obstacle in his way. Now, for the Republicans, number two, I have Donald Trump. I do think that Trump will be the second best Republican candidate. He is an awful suburban candidate. He's decent with minorities for a Republican. Like, he's not horrendous, but he's not, like, amazing. But among the white working class is where he is really good. He's very, very popular. or at least was very, very popular with white working class voters. He's a strong candidate in areas like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I don't know why I just left out Pennsylvania. Um, Joe Biden was a good candidate for those voters, which is why he probably won a lot of these states. Trump would have probably still won them though over against many other candidates. So he is a strong enough candidate in a lot of those areas. Even though he would have likely lost Georgia and Arizona, he would have probably carried Michigan or Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and maybe Michigan against most other Democratic candidates. Now, for the Democrats, number one, I have Andrew Yang. He will likely be the governor of New York. What am I thinking? Mayor of New York City. By this point in time, sorry if that photo's blurry. So he'll likely be the mayor of New York City. By the time of 2024, but he is. Sorry, I just had hand sanitizer. I was trying to not make a loud noise, so I stuck my finger in it and it made kind of like a bit of a weird noise. Anyways, Andrew Yang. He is a very good candidate with the white working class. His things like a basic universal income or universal basic income. What am I thinking? Universal basic income are popular with a lot of these white working class voters, and he's a pretty good suburban candidate. I mean, he's not liberal Mitt Romney, but he's not like an absolutely awful suburban candidate. So he's a pretty good suburban candidate. But then he's also a pretty strong, I guess, pretty average candidate with minorities. So he is a good candidate all across the board. He is probably, sorry, I just squirted out more hand sanitizer, probably the best candidate that the Democrats have at this point. I mean, like, they could run someone like Sherrod Brown, and he would also be a really good candidate, but I don't necessarily think that he's the likeliest of people to run. Now, for the Republicans, number one, I have Ron DeSantis. This should not be much of a surprise. DeSantis is widely regarded as the best candidate the Republicans can run. I mean, like, he has Trumpist appeal. He's a Trumpist candidate. I don't necessarily think that he'd do amazing in the Rust Belt. I don't necessarily think he'd do as insanely well as Trump. He's not as exciting. He's still pretty exciting, but he's not like as exciting as Trump. And he's also maybe too establishmentarian. I still think he'd do pretty well. Maybe carry Michigan. I think Michigan would be his challenge. But among suburban voters is supposedly where strong suit is. I disagree. I mean, like, if I wrote an article on this, I'll try to post a link in the description. So he even when you factor in the wave, he performs similarly in the suburbs to Trump. And Kamala Harris or Joe Biden are likely to be the nominee, who are both decent suburban candidates. So Gillum's strength in the suburbs won't necessarily even matter. Also, considering the fact that they'll be shifting for like 4 years won't help much. But anyways, he is supposed to be a good suburban candidate. I beg to differ. I don't think that he'd be amazing. But he's gonna do better than Trump. That's not in question. He performs similarly to Trump when you take out the wave. But I do think that he would overperform Trump. But then among minority voters, I mean, like, he's a strong candidate. I mean, like, we look at 2018, he won he lost Hispanic and Latino voters by like very, very small margin. So that was a very strong spot for him. He did very, very well with them. So I think that would definitely be a bright spot for DeSantis. And I think that he would probably be a fairly strong candidate for minority voters. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like below. Stay tuned for my next video tomorrow. Once again, I'm not certain what to film, so please comment suggestions down below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye!